Good morning, students. Welcome back to the session on audit. So in the last session, we picked up peer review, and that was about the review of the audit firms as compared to what we were discussing in our earlier sessions, wherein the auditor used to go out and do the reviews or the audits of various companies. Then we got into this discussion related to peer review, wherein another auditor will come in and review the work which has been done by the auditor. So that means it's about the audit of audit, or you can say review of the auditor, which is again a very important requirement in relation to maintaining quality standards, in relation to ensuring that all of the technical and ethical requirements which are required while executing any of the attestation work, or even if it's not really attestation work, is maintained by all the professional firms. So very important step in this direction, and this is carried out by a body of ICAI which is called as peer review board. Therein we understood as to what's the criteria, as to how the practicing firms are picked up. We use certain terms. The firm which becomes subject to this type of review was termed as practice unit. Another audit firm, or you can say another professional firm which does this review, was termed as the reviewer. And peer review, of course, we termed it as the board. So these are the three parties which are involved in this entire set of process of review. But other than that, because the practice unit would have carried out the audit or maybe some sort of attestation work of a company, so that's why that term will also keep getting used at multiple places. Then that is something we termed as client or the company. So we will now continue with our discussion in relation to all of those requirements, and we'll understand as to how this process of peer review really works. And as regards the requirements related to the reviewer, means how is this reviewer selected, because how is this practice unit selected, we discussed about it. It's categorized into two parts, level 1, level 2. Level 1 was all about you can say larger engagements in terms of providing attestation services as compared to largest. Secondly, if you remember, in terms of the practicing engagements, or in terms of the engagements for which this peer review was required, were all limited to the attestation engagements. Remember, all of them were limited to the attestation engagements. Attestation means the services wherein some sort of audit or review is required to be done. Yeah, which is not purely advisory in nature, because if something is purely advisory in nature, that doesn't fall within this criteria of peer review. So it has to be something which is attestation in nature, which is also very commonly termed as assurance services. Okay. So now moving further on to the requirements of peer review. And I would suggest if all of you can just start referring to it. Just give me 1 minute. Huh? Page number 17.10 of the study material. So what's this eligibility criteria for becoming a reviewer? So let's suppose if a firm wants to be wants itself to be selected as a peer reviewer, means the firm which will do the review work, then what's the criteria for doing this? Now this is again a detailed criteria which is listed down for any firm to be selected as the peer reviewer. A peer reviewer shall be a member in practice with at least 10 years of experience for level 1 entities and 7 years of experience for level 2 entities. Now in this context, if you remember, there was one thing that we discussed about the peer review, and that was the fact that for a peer reviewer, that means for the reviewer, it has to be a member, it has to be an individual. It's not something which will cover a firm, correct? So same is the requirement which comes over here in terms of eligibility of a reviewer. So it says it shall be a member in practice. So that means it's not something which is going to a firm, it's something which is limited to a member of the firm, or you can say member of the ICAI. And he should be in practice with at least 10 years of experience for level 1 entities. That means he must have been involved with level 1 entities for at least 10 years and 7 years of experience for level 2 entities. Accordingly, the reviewers will also be selected. So the reviewers may be selected for level 1 separately, level 2 separately, but for both of them, the criteria happens to be different. Okay. Now, moving further. In case a member has moved from industry to practice and is currently in practice, he should have 15 years of experience in industry and at least 5 years of experience in practice for level 1 entities, and an experience of at least 10 years in industry and at least 3 years of experience in practice for level 2 entities. So now, in respect of those members who may have worked, say, in industry means they were not into practice initially, they were into jobs. Okay. And now they have moved into practice and they want to become a reviewer. For them, the criteria is bit enhanced in terms of the requirements related to the minimum period over which they need to remain associated with level 1 entities or level 2 entities. Yeah. They should have undergone, the member should have undergone the requisite training and cleared the requisite test. So they will prescribe a specific training and a test thereafter, which the member needs to clear to become a peer reviewer, so that he is accustomed, he is familiar with the requirements related to the peer reviewer. The member should have conducted audit of level 1 entities for at least 7 years, or got his entity audited for at least 7 years, which should be a level 1 entity, to be eligible for conducting peer review of level 1 entities. So this again demonstrates or requires the association of the member with a level 1 or level 2 entities. Now, this is when a member will become eligible. A member on being appointed as a peer reviewer. So there are stages. First is the eligibility, which we have just discussed. Okay, so he should be, he has been prescribed certain minimum years, okay, depending on whether he is in practice or whether he was in job. Means whether he was with industry earlier. Then the member needs to get some training. There will also be a test. Now the eligibility criteria is fulfilled. Let's suppose the member is eligible and he has been appointed as a reviewer. Now on appointment, there are certain more requirements he needs to fulfill. And these are all for the reviewer. Please remember, all of these criteria are for the reviewer. He needs to furnish a declaration as prescribed by the board at the time of acceptance of peer review appointment. Sign a declaration of confidentiality as per Annexure A to the statement that will be furnished to him. So one, he will be giving a declaration for accepting the appointment. Now in this context, what's this declaration? Basically, it's about appointment which has been made by the board and he is accepting the appointment. Second, and the most important aspect is about confidentiality. Now, because he will be getting access to the data, he will be getting access to the information of another practice unit. He will be getting access to the information of another client of the practice unit which is subject to peer review. So that's why it's very important for this reviewer to maintain confidentiality as regards all of this information that he would be accessing. Yeah, and that is where this confidentiality declaration will also be required to be signed by him. Okay. Next, a member shall not be eligible for being appointed as a reviewer if, now these are the requirements related to his appointment for his eligibility. Now, there are certain members, there are certain criteria which specify from a negative standpoint as to in what situations a member shall not be eligible. Okay, so continuing on this criteria, we can say what are those areas or what are those criteria which will not allow a member to become a reviewer. If any disciplinary action or the proceeding is pending against him, he has been found guilty of professional or other misconduct by the council of or the board of discipline or the disciplinary committee at any time, he has been convicted by a competent court, whether within or outside India, of an offense involving moral turpitude and punishment with imprisonment. He or his partners or personnel has any obligation or conflict of interest in the practice unit. So in this case, if we look at the first three criteria, they are like very clear. Because if the member is subject to any sort of litigation, he has been convicted with any sort of offense, whether it's with ICAI or with any other judiciary, then he will be excluded from this consideration of a reviewer. Fourth and another very important point is about the independence of the reviewer. When the reviewer will review the work papers, the files of the practice unit, it's again important that he remains independent in terms of his association with that practice unit. Because if he will have any relationship, if he'll have any sort of conflict of interest, maybe with the client which the practice unit would have audited, maybe with the practice unit, then he will become biased. He will not be independent in terms of his review. So that's why it's very, very important that the practice reviewer should also be independent of the practice unit. And that is where this fourth point remains of extreme importance, that he or his partners or any of his professionals should not have any obligation or conflict of interest in relation to that practice unit. Fourth, a reviewer shall not accept any professional assignment from the practice unit for a period of 2 years from the date of appointment. Further, he should not have accepted any professional assignment from the practice unit for a period of 2 years before the date of assignment as a reviewer of that practice unit. Now, this next point is again in continuation of avoiding a situation wherein the reviewer is independent of the practice unit. Because let's suppose if the reviewer was doing some professional work for this practice unit, for which he is required to do the review now, then he may have bias towards that practice unit. Secondly, let's suppose even if he is independent now, but after he does the review, he sets up some relationship with that practice unit, and after that, he picks up some professional work from them. So it implies that he would not have remained independent. So that's why there is a restriction which has been imposed, that after his review, he will not be able to take up the work from this practice unit for another 2 years. So total 4 years is the criteria. So let's suppose review is going on. So 2 years earlier and 2 years after. He cannot pick up any professional work from this practice unit. Okay, and idea is to just ensure that the reviewer remains independent. Okay, next. Now continuing on the requirements related to the review. So now, for this purpose of peer review, reviewer has been selected. Now reviewer is an individual, as has been specified, and we understand reviewer cannot be a professional firm. Now, many times for an individual to review the work of a practice unit all alone may not be possible. He may need some assistance, and generally he would need an assistant who can help him on this entire process of peer review. And also considering the fact that the entities which have been involved in this peer review process are not too small. So that means the work that he is going to review during this process of peer review will take some time. And the organizations which would have been audited by the practice unit, be it level 1 or level 2, they would all be of generally a decent size. In fact, level 1 is all about large size organizations which would have been audited by the practice units. So in such a situation, for a reviewer to work on this all alone becomes difficult, and that's why there's a provision which is available. So it's an option. It's not a mandate. It's an option. Let's understand what's the option. The option is to have a qualified assistant. Let's understand this requirement related to qualified assistant. The reviewer may take the help of a qualified assistant while carrying out this peer review. In this context, the board decided to clarify that a reviewer is permitted to take assistance from only one assistant, and that assistant should also be a chartered accountant and a person who does not attract any of the disqualifications which are prescribed under the Chartered Accountant Act. So that means he should not be disqualified. Number one, he has to be a chartered accountant and he should not be disqualified. Secondly, for this support, only one assistant will be made available to the reviewer. The name of the qualified assistant which the reviewer would like to assist him shall be identified and intimated to the board as well as the practice unit before the commencement of the peer review. So this communication has to go out that this is going to be my assistant, and this communication should also be made to the practice unit, not only the board. And that assistant, because he will be playing the similar sort of a role which the reviewer would play, so that's why some of the things are important for that assistant also. He would also be required to maintain confidentiality standards. He would also be required to be independent. He should also not have any sort of conflict. Yeah, all of these eligibility criteria will not fall on him. As regards his training, etc., this will be taken care of by the reviewer, because he is the one who is leading on this process of peer review, but he is the one who is also training him on this process of peer review. But to maintain confidentiality and to be independent while carrying out this peer review will another important requirement on the part of the qualified assistant. Therefore, he will also have to sign declaration of confidentiality. He shall have no direct interface either with the practice unit or with the board. Further, the person chosen for assisting the reviewer shall be from the firm of the reviewer and as a partner or paid assistant as per the records of ICAI. Yeah, so this is another thing which comes up now, that he has to be a partner or a paid assistant as per the records of ICAI. Clear? So this is about maintaining the required standards or some of the eligibility criteria for the qualified assistant along with the reviewer. Now moving on to the next perspective, and that is about confidentiality. Though we have talked about it, just quickly getting into this confidentiality as to what all is required to be covered over here. Strict confidentiality shall be maintained. Strict confidentiality shall be maintained by all those who are involved in peer review process. Reviewers, members of the board, any qualified assistant or practice unit. Very, very important, because it's not only the data of the practice unit which is subject to review. This entire data belongs to a company. Correct? All persons governed by the secrecy provisions shall at all times preserve and aid in preserving secrecy with regard to any matter arising in the performance or in assistance in the performance of any function directly or indirectly related to the process and the conduct of peer reviews. Reviewer shall not make use of or disclose the contents of review report or any confidential information about the process of review unless as required by the board of the council. Okay. Non-compliance, if there is any, if happens with the secrecy provisions in the above clause, shall amount to professional misconduct. Yeah, so it's very, very important to maintain the secrecy. And as we have discussed, a declaration of confidentiality will have to be signed by reviewer as well as the qualified assistant to ensure that this continues, it goes through. All right. So now we will move on to the approach of this review. We will now understand as to what is the step-by-step approach which the reviewer would like to follow or which he should follow, and how this entire process of peer review will be carried out. So let's understand. First step is to gain an understanding of the engagement letter. Since an insurance engagement, or for that matter, any kind of engagement should begin with an engagement letter. So it's all about understanding the scope. Now, please try to understand the approach. We have three persons involved. One is the board. Second is the reviewer. Third is the practice unit. Okay, three parties are involved. There's no doubt about it. The three parties are involved. But as regards these three parties, there is another party which is not getting involved in this process, but which is also a party to this process. And which party is this? company, the client who was audited by this practice unit, and now whose data is indirectly going to the reviewer. Correct? Now, what is the approach? In simple terms, if we have to understand this entire approach or this entire process, what is it that this reviewer will do? This reviewer will basically step into the shoes of this practice unit and will check that if this reviewer was the auditor of this company, how this audit would have been carried out. Simply, yeah. So that's why, what is the first thing which this reviewer would want to understand? What was the scope of work? And the other thing which is very, very important for him to know about this company is the understanding. Yeah, all of those aspects related to audit will now come into picture, but with an indirect approach, because he will not be doing the full audit. That's not the scope. He's not going to do a duplication of sorts, because everything is completed. So that's why he will just ensure from this completed work whether the completed work was as per the prescribed criteria or not, as per the prescribed technical and ethical standards or not. Clear? The first thing with which reviewer will start happens to be the understanding of the scope, which comes from the document engagement letter. Yeah. The next step. Number of assurance engagements to be selected. Number of assurance engagements to be selected requires exercise of judgment by the reviewer based on the evaluation of replies given by the questionnaire and the size of the practice unit. The objective is to obtain a reasonable cross-section of practice unit's clients, although greater weight may be given to large clients. So I'll come to this point as to what is it that is required over here. The practice unit may have policies and procedures for accepting a particular engagement. These policies, procedures may not exist in the form of reports in each practice unit. In such a case, reviewers should consider inquiring from the concerned persons about such policies, procedures. Next, the reviewer may follow a combination of compliance procedures and substantive procedures throughout the peer review process. The mix of compliance and substantive procedures depends upon professional judgment. Finally, the reviewer may, while evaluating records, may consider the following. Determine that any significant issues, I'll come to all of these points. Determine that any significant issues, matters, problems that arose during the course of engagement have been appropriately considered, resolved and documented. Determine that adequate audit evidence or other relevant evidence in relation to engagement is obtained, and determine that the significant decisions related to the engagement, use of professional judgment, the resolution of significant matters have been properly documented. Now, we need to get into all of these aspects one by one. Yeah, so this was broadly about a lot of things that we tried to capture over here. So let's understand how would this peer review process really start. First step in this process will be the selection of the practice unit and the appointment of the reviewer. Who will do this exercise? Board. Now the board will first of all pick up these two parties, because board will have a lot of practice units which will be subject to the peer review, and the board is also having a panel of reviewers for the review of all of these practice units. Now the selection of one out of the reviewers and one out of the practice unit, and then assigning that task to the reviewer for the review of the practice unit is something which will start. So what's the first thing? selection of practice unit and appointment of reviewer. And then of course all of these activities will start, which I have just discussed with you and on which we'll get into more details as we move forward. So the first step, therefore, in this peer review process will be the notification to the practice unit. A declaration in the form approved by the board, shall be submitted by practice unit within 7 days from the date of practice unit has been notified by the board, so that reviewer to be allotted from the panel of 3 reviewers can be identified by the board as per the level submitted by practice unit in the declaration form. So first of all, board will notify this practice unit that you are becoming subject to review, and the practice unit will have to send back the declaration, wherein they will fill all the prescribed criteria on the basis of which. So this first communication starts from board to practice unit and then the practice unit to the board, basis which board will decide who should be the reviewer for this type of engagement. Name of 3 reviewers shall be recommended by the board to the practice unit so selected. So now after this, once again, the board will communicate the name of 3 reviewers. So board will give 3 options. The practice unit shall select 1 out of these 3 reviewers and intimate to the board within 7 days of the receipt of the names. Now please remember that at almost every step we are discussing the time which is prescribed, and this time comes from this entire process which has been established for peer review. Peer review is not something which can just start at any point of time and there's no time limit which is prescribed to this. No, there's a specified time period within which this entire process has to be completed, and that's why each and every step, each and every activity has been assigned a specified timeline, and that has to be fulfilled. Otherwise this can become a never-ending task. Okay. The board shall intimate the reviewer so selected and seek his consent. Now what has happened? Board notified, then the practice unit declares, or you can say submits the form. Then the board is giving option of 3 reviewers to the practice unit, out of which 1 reviewer is selected. Now so far, what has happened? Out of this panel of reviewers, 3 were selected by the board, out of which 1 is confirmed by the practice unit. But so far, the reviewer has not accepted this appointment. So what's the next step? The next step will be that the board shall now intimate the reviewer who is selected. So this reviewer who is selected, now the board will reach out to him and seek his consent. Because only when the reviewer is selected, he has given his consent, then the practice review work will start. Okay. So now, as regards the appointment of the parties, it's all done. So now the practice unit is set up, correct? The reviewer is set up and the board is already there. Okay, so 3 parties have been put in place. Now the planning will start, and now this entire work will largely be driven by the reviewer. Largely. Some of the things will also be taken up by the board, but largely it will be driven by the reviewer, because he is now supporting the board. So he has now come on board. He is now supporting the board for carrying out this process of peer review. Okay. I think I missed a couple of queries of Sumit. Sumit asked me, said, does this peer review board consider geographical area while appointing peer reviewers? Of course, certain considerations are given to this aspect as well. Then he is asking, sir, if a firm wants to appoint as a peer reviewer, then at the first there should be willingness of the firm to be appointed as peer review, or the peer review board automatically, as we have discussed, that it's not about the firm, it's about the reviewer who is selected. And of course, if the reviewer wants to get selected, he has to get empaneled with the peer review board first of all. Only if he is empaneled, then he will be considered for this work of peer review, otherwise not. And for empanelment, there's an eligibility criteria. For this eligibility criteria, there's again a process which he has to fulfill. If he is empaneled, then he will keep getting the work from the peer review board for the reviews of these practice units till the time he remains associate. Because this empanelment also keeps getting changed. Now, as a next step, information to be furnished by the practice unit will start. A practice unit which has been selected for a peer review shall be notified by the board. And now an intimation by the board of the reviewer's consent, the practice unit shall within 15 days furnish the following information to the reviewer. So now this practice unit will get in touch with the reviewer and provide the required information to the reviewer. What is that information? Duly filled in questionnaire by the board. So the board will require certain information in the form of a questionnaire, so which the practice unit will provide. Complete list of assurance engagement clients. All the assurance engagement clients, indicating nature of services provided, fees charged for the period under review. A note on the policies and procedures adopted by the practice unit in relation to independence, staff supervision and development, second person review, and the process generally followed in carrying out assurance services. Details of any proceedings against the practice unit or any of its partners or qualified assistants taken up by any regulatory, monitoring, or enforcement bodies related to investigation or allegation of deficiency in the conduct of assessed function by them during the period of 3 years preceding this period of review or at any time thereafter, that is till the date of submission of duly filled in questionnaire, will have to be submitted by the practice unit to the reviewer. So all of this information will go out to whom? Reviewer. Peer review board can call for such relevant information from the UDIN directorate and share the concerned details with the peer reviewer, which shall form part of his review. Now, another thing, let's understand. Practice unit is required to provide details of all the assurance engagements. Yeah, if you read point number B, details of all the assurance engagements. Let's suppose practice unit would have performed 20 assurance engagements. Now, as per the mandatory requirements of ICAI, for every assurance engagement, there should be a UDI. Remember, UDI, we discussed that it's required to be specified on the certificate, on the tax audit report, or any of the attestation document. Now, the peer review board shall also call for the relevant information from this database of the UDIN and share all of those details with the reviewer. So this way, what will happen? Let's suppose the practice unit would have carried out 25 engagements, but they have submitted only 20. So they will not be in a situation to do that now, because there's a cross check from the UDIN database. Or if they would have submitted 20, but the UDIN database shows only 18, then 2 are without UDIN, yeah, which is again not permissible. Next, selection of sample by the reviewer. Now, this is another very important step because after this, actually, the work by the reviewer in relation to this client will start. The reviewer shall, within 15 days of receipt of information from the practice unit, select a sample of the assurance services that he would like to review. and intimate the same to the practice unit and the peer review board. The reviewer may also seek further or additional clarification from the practice unit on the information which is furnished or not furnished. The reviewer shall also plan for on-site review visit or initial meeting in consultation with the practice unit. The reviewer shall give the practice unit at least 15 days time to keep ready the necessary records of the selected assurance services. The reviewer and the practice unit shall mutually cooperate and ensure that the entire review process is completed within 90 days from the date of notifying the practice unit about its selection for review. So can you understand? This entire time period is available within which this entire process has to be completed. Yeah. And this timeline is strictly required to be followed. Generally, no exception should be there. And whenever there are any exceptions which are going to happen, such communication should also be made to the board on time, that these exceptions are going to happen and these are the reasons because of which exceptions cannot be avoided. Okay. Now, as regards this review by the reviewer, when the practice unit submits the list of various engagements, one out of those engagements will be selected by the reviewer, because this practice unit has submitted all the data. And the reviewer may also keep seeking more information as regards the data which is provided. And once out of this entire list of clients or list of engagements, one is selected, that is the time when the practice unit will start getting the information ready. So of course, there's no doubt that the practice unit should be already ready with all the records and information for the peer review. But still, there are a lot of additional clarifications. There are a lot of additional information. There are some sort of questionnaires, forms, which will be required to be filled by the practice unit, for which practice unit is given adequate time to keep ready everything which the reviewer would like to review. Yeah. Because on the basis of such review, on the basis of that entire setup, the reviewer will be able to complete the review on time. Because let's suppose if the reviewer comes on board means generally the reviewer will visit the premises of the practice unit. So reviewer will not call upon all the information, all the records of this practice unit related to this client at his premises. No. So reviewer will actually go to the office of the practice unit, sit over there. Now there's no specified time period for which he will sit. The maximum time period of his review is available. So he can spend entire time over there or maybe few days over there and do the review. Generally the peer reviewer will sit over there for 2 to 3 days, generally. Because remaining work he would like to first of all complete at his office, and the part of the work for which he thinks he needs to go and meet the relevant personnel of practice unit. Some of the information needs more clarification, which can be provided only on site. So that's why generally he would consider 2 to 3 days or 3 to 4 days sitting at the office of the practice unit. Okay. And this entire process is similar to audit. When the practice unit would have altered the client, they would have received a lot of information from the client, yeah, which requires understanding, clarification related to various things. Same is the case of practice unit. In a way, this practice unit has become client for the reviewer. So that's why it's very, very important for this client to cooperate, for this practice unit to cooperate with the reviewer, as well as the reviewer to cooperate with the practice unit. And through this mutual cooperation, this entire process can be completed on time. Okay. Next is about the execution. Now let's understand how all of these reviews will actually happen. So we'll now get into some details around this review. Peer review visits will be conducted at the practice reviewers head office or any of the branches or any of the locations. This on-site review should not extend beyond 7 to 15 working days based on the size of the practice unit. Number 1, compliance or review general control. The reviewer is required to carry out a compliance review of following general controls. First, independence, maintenance of professional skills and standards, outside consultation, staff recruitment, office administration. All of these things are very, very important because they become the basis. Yeah. So when the practice unit would have planned its work, it would have looked into the independence requirements, it would have ensured the staff training to ensure the quality standards. All of these aspects will be first of all focused upon by the reviewer as regards the practice unit. Selection of assurance service engagements for review. The number of assurance service engagements to be reviewed shall depend upon standards of quality control which the practice unit will be generally providing, size and nature of assurance service engagements. Generally, the large size engagements are picked up. Generally, but there is no fixed criteria for this. Methodology, which is generally adopted by the practice unit in providing the assurance services. The number of partners or the members which is involved in assurance engagement in the practice unit means on that particular client. The number of locations or branches of the practice unit. The fees which is charged or received by the practice unit. Okay, this is not really the service tax, this is the GST now. From the initial sample selected at the planning stage, the reviewer in consultation with the peer review board may reduce or enlarge the initial sample size of the assurance engagements for the purposes of his review. So this is all about selection out of the samples which, out of the list of the clients which the practice reviewer, which the practice unit would have submitted to the reviewer. Now, as regards the review of the records. So let's see what is it that will be done in terms of review of the records. Now, herein, two approaches are followed by the review. One is called as compliance approach and second is called as substantive approach. We can just very simply, in simple terms, understand what is this compliance approach. Compliance approach is all about focusing on the compliance by the practice unit. Focusing on the compliance by the practice unit as regards the technical or ethical standards. Means how the practice unit is approaching its engagements. Because when the practice unit is approaching any engagement, any assurance engagement, what are those technical standards which they follow? Means getting into their policies and procedures. See, every firm will have some style of work. They will have some policies, they will have some procedures. It's not necessary that each and every policy or procedure will be documented, but their way of practice, their style of working, some of their policies and procedures which will be documented will give an insights to the reviewer about how this practice unit really works. What's their course of action? What is their actual approach in terms of approaching any of the clients? So this is something which will also form a part of planning for the practice unit whenever they start their work, and which is also a part of review by the reviewer in relation to the practice unit. And this is one of the most important aspects, because if the reviewer will understand as to how the practice unit is approaching all of these engagements, and which is they always do, then he will get a great insight about what would have followed subsequently. Because it's all about getting into the procedural aspects, policies which the practicing unit would have been following for all of its clients generally. Okay. So let's understand this compliance approach. compliance approach is to assess whether proper control procedures have been established or followed by the practice unit to ensure that assurance services are being performed in accordance with technical, professional, and ethical standards. Following areas shall be considered. Assurance services records for administration. Review and evaluation of system of internal controls. Yeah, all of these things which they would have followed. Substantive tests which they would have followed. Financial statements, presentations, and disclosures. Assurance services conclusions. Assurance services reporting which they would have followed. So all of these things they will have to check and understand, which will give them an insight about all of these things which are required to be done. Substantive approach assurance engagements. Now, over and above this compliance approach, they would also be following a substantive approach. So let's understand about this substantive approach. Just give me 1 minute. Okay, so talking about this substantive approach, this approach requires review of assurance working papers in order to establish extent of compliance, whether the assurance work has been carried out as per the technical, professional, and ethical standards. So we can say this work is basically divided into two parts. One is to get into the policies and procedures. How the compliance mechanism, how this entire approach is really followed by the practice unit. And second is to get into the working papers of the practice unit. Okay, which we can say is the substantive approach, wherein the reviewer will get into the working papers. Now, working papers will comprise of anything which the reviewer would like to focus on. And these days, the focus is significantly higher on the planning work, which would have been done by the practice unit, because planning is the key. Planning will give an insights about the risk assessment, about the control mechanism, which would have been evaluated by the practice unit as related to the client. This would give him insights about the risk which is associated with the client and which this practice unit would have evaluated. Correct? And then comes the subsequent step, that is about review of the working papers. Because the working papers will also throw up a lot of things to the reviewer. Some of the issues which might have come across, how those issues would have been resolved, what were the major problems which were faced during the course of engagement, what were the areas which involved significant time, what were the areas which involved significant judgments, how consultations were obtained wherever there was any matter which was of technical in nature, was there any need to engage an auditor's expert. Many places, at many places, the engagement firm, that means this practice unit, would have got involved in the work, would have got involved in the review of the work of the expert of the management of the client. So how was that work really captured? Yeah. So if you can just get into the audit and if you just recollect a lot of things which we covered in case of audit. So all of those aspects, and out of all of those aspects, some of the critical aspects are what this reviewer will always focus on. Yeah? And that's why the planning documents which the practice unit would have prepared, the observations memo, you remember the observations memo, the documents which contain the misstatements, the documents which contains the misstatements which are not material, and documents which are in the nature of say management representation letter. These are very important to this reviewer so that he can just understand as to what all issues were involved, how all of those issues were closed, how the communications etc. took place with the management, and what were the basis of final reporting by the practice unit as regards this audit client. Okay, clear on this? Yeah. So moving on to the next part, and now we will talk about the reporting. The peer review report. Now, when it comes to the reporting, it's not about the report of this practice unit on the client, because this report is already finalized and this report is already forming part of the working papers. Yeah. Now the report has to go from the reviewer. So the reviewer will submit its report to the board in respect of the work which the reviewer would have carried out. So let's understand what are those requirements in relation to submission of the report of the peer review carried out by the reviewer. The peer review report should state that the system of quality control for the assurance services of the practice unit for the period under review has been designed so as to carry out the assurance services in a manner that ensures compliance with technical, professional, and ethical standards. Okay. So this report will basically capture all of these areas. Whether the independence was maintained, whether the professional skills and standards were maintained, wherever consultations were required to be taken, were those consultations taken? How or what's the policy of the practice unit in relation to its staff recruitment, in relation to the supervision of the staff, in relation to the development of the staff which they will have, office administration. Another very important area. Next step will be about the documentation in relation to the practice units engagement. So how the documentation would have been carried out, whether the documentation captures all of these information which is required by the peer reviewer or not, because all of these things are not something which the reviewer will go and discuss with the practice unit. You would like to see all of these things in the working papers of the practice unit. Now, as regards his report, let's get into an understanding as to how he will really approach regarding this. After completing the on-site review, now the review is completed. He has also went to the office of the practice unit and reviewed everything which was required to be done on it. Still, the review is not completed. Okay. The reviewer, before making his report to the board, shall communicate his findings in the preliminary report to the practice unit if, in his opinion, the systems and procedures are deficient or non-compliant with reference to any matter that has been noticed by him, or if there are any other matters where he wants to seek clarification. The practice unit shall, within 15 days of the receipt of the findings, make any submission or representations in writing to the reviewer. So that means, first of all, the reviewer will send a draft report. And what's the purpose? See, because the report is preliminary, he's still looking for some more clarifications. That's why this is preliminary. So that's why he is again reaching out to the practice unit. He is not going to the office because that review work in detail is all done. Now it's all about finalization of the report. So before finalizing the report, there could be a lot of points which he may not have understood properly. But when those are documented in the report and over which the responses of practice unit will come, then he will get more clarity around those points. So this is generally a practice which is followed. Yeah, and it's always better to have a communication between these two parties before making the report final to the board. Yeah. So this practice unit will also provide the clarification or the response over this preliminary report to the peer reviewer. And again, there's a timeline which is prescribed for this. Next comes the report of the reviewer. Now the preliminary report is all done. This has also been in a way discussed. So in a way, what can we also say? That the preliminary report has also been discussed with the practice unit. Yeah. At the end of on-site review, if the reviewer is satisfied with the reply received from the practice unit, he shall submit a peer review report to the board along with his initial findings, response by the practice unit, and the manner in which responses have been dealt with. A copy of report shall also be forwarded to the practice unit. Now, what will happen? After the clarification has gone out to the reviewer, so reviewer will submit three things. His initial report. Initial report, you can say, that means the preliminary report, which he gave to the practice unit also. The responses which he would have received. The responses of practice unit. And how he dealt with. How he dealt with those responses. This will also be communicated to the board. This is something he will do when he is satisfied with these responses. But it may happen that even if this clarification response has gone out from the practice unit to the reviewer and reviewer is still not clarified. Now, let's see what he will do. In case reviewer is of the opinion that the response which is submitted by the practice unit is not satisfactory. Now, this was situation number 1. Wherein he is satisfied with this. Reviewer shall accordingly submit a modified report to the board, incorporating his reasons for the same. Reviewer shall also submit initial findings, preliminary report, response by the practice unit, and the manner in which response have been dealt with. A copy of the report shall also be forwarded to the practice unit. Now, in situation number 2, when the reviewer is not satisfied with these responses, then he will submit all of these 3 again. Plus, he will also submit a modified. Because now he has changed his report. Why? Because he is not satisfied with the responses of practice unit. So that's why his initial report is now changed. This modified report doesn't mean report with modifications. Report modified means it's changed. And in both the situations, situation number 1 as well as situation number 2, the report which would have been sent out to the board will also be sent out to the practice unit. Okay, so you can say in both the situations, situation 1, situation 2, the report will go to the practice unit also. Yeah. In case of a modified report, means in this situation number 2, in case the report is now required to be changed, because this shows as if some clarity is not available in respect of this review which has been completed, or there seems to be some sort of difference between the way some things have been approached by the reviewer and some things which have been which would have been approached by the practice unit. The board shall order for a follow-on review after a period of 1 year from the date of issue of report as mentioned in B above. If the board so decides, period of 1 year may be reduced, but shall not be less than 6 months from the date of issue of the report. This situation, wherein some sort of modification has come in, would generally indicate certain problems in the engagement. This would arise when the reviewer will not be satisfied as regards the compliance of technical, professional, or ethical standards by the practice unit. And if that would have happened, then it's very, very important that even though it was not complied with, let's suppose for first financial year, okay? Let's suppose the practice unit's files were picked up for 18-19, and therein some problem was found. Now, what is it that the board would want? Board would want that this should get improved, because what's the idea of the peer review? Peer review is not there to just find the faults. Peer review is there to ensure that after the faults or any of the problems would have arisen, things get improved. Okay, so it's only for the improvement of the quality that this entire mechanism has been established, this entire setup has been created. And that is possible when the next step in this direction is continued. And what's the next step? Now this practice unit, in respect of the same client, will become subject to peer review once again. So they will have to get their peer review done once again. So in the last session, if you remember, we discussed that this practice unit, depending on whether they are level 1, level 2, or maybe a specialized category, will be subject to practice review. Sorry, will be subject to peer review. Correct? Now this is over and above that. So let's suppose if this is level 1, they will be subject to peer review every 3 years. Yeah. And let's suppose they have got this done for 18-19. Now, considering this modified report, a follow-on for this report, for this engagement will be done within a period of 1 year once again. And this is something which will be mandatorily required. This will be mandatorily required on the part of the practice unit to be carried out. Though the practice unit, if it wants that this entire process should be completed earlier, they don't really want to wait for 1 year because they want a clean chit. So they may get this done within a period of 6 months also, as per the discretion of the board. But this period cannot be cut down further from this 6 months to 3 months, because that is the time which the board would like to give to the practice unit for them to improve and for them to change over the things. Okay, clear on this aspect? Yeah. Now, once this entire process is completed, what's the next step? Next step is about peer review certificate. On receipt of the peer review report, the board shall within 3 months issue a peer review certificate to the practice unit, mentioning the next day for the peer review. Inform the practice unit that a peer review certificate cannot be issued, along with the reasons therefore, as well as inform the practice unit about the due date for conducting a follow-on. So very easy. Once again, you can just understand this now. In situation number 1, in situation number 1. Yeah. In situation number 1, practice unit will get the peer review, practice unit will get the peer review certificate. Or let me just put it this way. In situation number 1, practice unit will get the peer review certificate. And whenever peer review certificate is issued, it always carries an expiry date, wherein the due date for next peer review is specified. Okay, before that, another peer review has to be completed so that the certificate can be renewed after. In situation number 2, what will happen? Peer review certificate will not be issued. In fact, a communication will be issued as regards this follow-on of 1 year. After which, if the things are clear, means after which, if this moves into situation number 1, then the peer review certificate will be issued. Okay. Validity of peer review certificate. A practice unit cannot continue with the existing certificate whose validity has expired. All the documents signed by the practice unit during the intervening period, that means when the peer review certificate would have expired, and the issue of new certificate will be invalid. So let's understand. Say on this date, peer review certificate is issued. It's issued by the board. Yeah, and as we have discussed, whenever this is issued, it carries a due date of review. Within which the next review should get completed, or you can say it's also the expiry date. In a way, this is also the expiry date. Okay. So before the expiry date, the review process should get completed. Yeah. If the review process is not completed and before the expiry date, the new certificate has not been issued. Let's suppose this is the period over which this certificate remains expired. Yeah, and let's suppose on this date new certificate is issued. Now during this period, the practice unit will be considered as if they are not having the peer review certificate. So if there is any assurance engagement which requires practice unit to have peer review certificate, without which they cannot take up that assurance engagement, then if in such a period, if without having peer review certificate, practice unit signs any such document in relation to that assurance engagement, that certificate or that document signed by the practice unit will be considered to be invalid. For example, audit of listed companies. Audit of listed companies can be picked up by a CA firm only when it possesses peer review certificate. So let's suppose their peer review certificate expires over here. Then they cannot pick up audit of listed company after that. Even for the audit of listed companies, they would have already taken. They will not remain eligible anymore. Yeah. So that's why this peer review certificate, in terms of its validity, etc., is very, very important aspect which one needs to analyze. It cannot be just avoided or overlooked. Otherwise, this may have serious repercussions. Okay. Now, If we talk about this peer review process, there are a lot of things which we have understood in relation to this peer review. But let's understand some of the inherent limitations which exist in this process, which are again very, very important for any practice reviewer to understand, the board to understand, and which is something also known to the practice unit. So we'll have to go back to the review process to understand this requirement or to understand these limitations. If you remember, there are two things which the peer reviewer will focus on, or you can say there are two approaches. One was the compliance approach. Second was the substantive approach. Remember, these are the approaches which the reviewer will take in respect of his review as regards the practice unit. Correct? Now, review is for one assurance engagement. This practice unit will not have only one client. It will have multiple clients. So this is, let's suppose, client 1. This is, let's suppose, client 2. This is, let's suppose, client 3. And this is, let's suppose, client 4. Correct? And even for one client, a practice unit will not be performing only one engagement. Generally, it will be performing multiple engagements. Let's suppose for this client, practice unit does the stat audit, tax audit. It also does some certification work. Let's suppose for this client, practice unit does tax audit, GST audit. Yeah. For this client, practice unit has been doing some other assurance services. And same is the case over here. And considering the size of the practice units, they are quite large. Yes or no? They are quite large. Now, when this reviewer will come, what will he review? One assurance engagement. Let's suppose he picks up this assurance engagement, stat audit of this client. Now, by doing this review, or you can say by doing the review of only this engagement, what is it that the process is doing? Now, it's not the reviewer or the board. The process is doing on the basis of the review of the files or the performance of this practice unit in relation to this stat audit. Only one stat audit of one of the clients of the practice unit. Practice unit will become eligible for peer review certificate. Yeah, they will get peer review certificate only on the basis of one review out of their various engagements. And out of their various engagements, one engagement is not really selected by the practice unit. We can say that reviewer also has a role to play in this. But as we have discussed, generally it's the large size which is picked up out of the lot. And this is something which is required also, because on large clients the risk will be more, the procedural aspects will be more, the requirements will be more. So that is generally a tendency for the reviewer to focus on. Because of which, what may happen is the fact that the quality standards which this practice unit may be maintaining on this client may not be the same which this practice unit may be following in relation to their lot of other clients. Let's suppose they have got so many more clients which are small in size, wherein the engagements they have been doing are also small. Now, irrespective of whether the engagement is small or big, is that not important? That is important. But will that get tested during the course of this peer review? No. So this is the limitation. Limitation is because of the limited work about that practice unit which is getting checked, and not everything around the practice unit which is becoming subject to check. Yeah. And this is something which we can easily understand that this can also be a matter of concern, but this can't really be helped. Yeah. Idea is therefore to really focus on the key engagements, key risk areas, and that's why when the reviewer will focus on the compliance approach, means what are the policies and procedures which this practice unit has been following in general. This is not really limited to this client in general, because generally a practice unit will have policies and procedures which will be applied to almost all of their clients. Their extent may be low or more, but this will generally be applied to more or less all of their clients. So that's why that should always be the most important aspect on which reviewers should focus on. As regards the substantive approach, there's no doubt that this is also important, but this is completely client specific. This all talks about the issues which the practice unit would have faced in relation to this client. Any technical problems, any accounting matters, any audit matters, all of those would have been generally taken care of by the practice unit. And which will again not be possible for the reviewer to get into too much details considering the time that we'll have. But this area will give the reviewer not only an insight about this approach, but also about the approach which the practice unit would have been following on all of its clients. Clear? Yeah. So that's why this is one of the areas which is of significant importance in case of peer review process. Clear? Clear around this entire peer review process? So there is one more aspect which we need to understand before we wind up our discussion related to this peer review, and that is about certain obligations of the practice unit. Let's understand what are those obligations of practice unit. You can just refer to page number 17.13. Any practice unit, in addition to the prescribed information to be furnished, including the questionnaire. So this is about all the information which will go out to the reviewer. As the board may deem fit, shall comply with the following. Produce to the reviewer or allow access to any record, document or prescribed register maintained by the practice unit, or any other record or document which is of class or description so specified and which is in the possession or under the control of the practice unit. Provide to the reviewer such explanation or further particulars or information in respect of anything produced in compliance with the requirement under 1 means any of the document which the reviewer may specify. Provide to the reviewer all assistance in connection with peer review. So this is about the cooperation. Where any information or matter relevant to the practice unit is recorded otherwise than in a legible form. The practice unit shall provide and present to the reviewer a reproduction of any such information or matter or of the relevant part of it in a legible form with a translation in English or Hindi if the matter is in any other language, and if such translation is requested for by the reviewer. The practice unit shall be responsible and accountable for the accuracy and truthfulness of the translation so provided. The reviewer shall not take any extracts of the practice unit's clients, files, records which are examined by him while conducting the peer review as part of its working paper. So this is something which is an obligation on the part of the reviewer, because that is something which is confidential to the practice unit. So that is the property of the practice unit. So as regards the information of the client, etc., reviewer should not extract. Yeah, reviewer shall complete this entire process of review within the specified timeline. So these are certain obligations which are there on the part of the reviewer as well as the practice unit which one needs to consider. And these are very much in line with the process of this peer review that we have understood so far. Okay. Now, as regards this entire process of peer review, if you really want to get into the details around it, then the way we have discussed, the way we have covered all of these points, you can just note down some of the flowcharts I have also sort of tried to create for you, which you can refer to. But I can also see some very nicely laid out flowcharts in respect of this entire process, okay, which mostly captures the entire part of our discussion in relation to the peer review process in the form of flowcharts on page number 17.20 to 17.22 of the study material. So I would suggest later on at the time of your exam, for the purposes of your revision, once you are through with all of these points in more detail, you can just refer to these flowcharts, and this will be a quick overview in relation to a quick revision as regards this entire part related to the peer review. Clear? Yeah. So I would say these flowcharts are very, very helpful to you. Just make sure you flip through all of these points one by one, and considering this entire part that we have discussed so far, you should be able to understand each and everything related to this flowchart carefully. And if you want to add any of your notes, etc., to this flowchart, you can just feel free to do that. Okay. Now, before we move on to the quality review, so that's the next thing that we need to take up now, and we'll pick up that one after the break. We will also get into some practical examples. So let me just see whether we can pick up the practical examples after peer review, or maybe just I would like to combine the practical examples of quality review and peer review, and that too we'll do after the break. But if you have any questions, any doubts in relation to any of the things that we have discussed so far, please let me know, and then we can go in for a break. As regards your queries, I think Sumit's queries are all answered. All right. So we'll go in for break now, and after the break, we will continue with our discussion in relation to the quality review then. Huh? All right. Okay. So let's take a break of 10 minutes and let's meet after the break. Hi. So we'll now move on to the next topic, and that is about quality review. Before we move on to the quality review, which will also capture some of the same perspectives in terms of the review which is required over there as compared to the peer review. So it will be good to first of all understand as to how that review or how that quality review is going to be different from the peer review. So let's understand about that quickly, and then we get on to our discussion related to the quality review. Peer review, as we have discussed, is all about improving the quality. So that's why its focus is more on improving the systems and policies, procedures of the practice unit. So that's the audit firm. All the sample audit files are inspected by the peer reviewer. It is done for the purposes of testing the effectiveness of those systems and procedures. If you remember, the focus is mainly on this compliance part, because if the reviewer will focus on this compliance part, he will get into the understanding of the approach which this practice unit will follow for all of this part. The intention is not to find faults, but to help the firm develop effective systems. Yeah, because the intent is what? Let's suppose if there are any deficiencies, the board will require follow. So there is no penalty which is imposed. The idea is that the firm, the practice unit, which is making the mistakes, which is not complying, let's suppose, with any of the things, they are not issued the certificate till the time they improve. And the intent is very much that the firm should improve their quality standards. So you can say it's a kind of monitoring process. It's a kind of which is there to support. Peer review is a part of activities of ICAI aimed at improving the quality of services. Correct? So broadly, this is how this peer review process works, or this peer review mechanism is required for. Now moving on to the quality review. Now in relation to the quality review, we have not understood as to what all is required to be done. Quality review is also, you can say, a kind of similar type of audit, wherein a reviewer will come, the reviewer will review the files of the practice unit, okay, and which may appear somewhat similar to you, which may appear sort of duplication to you, or which may appear as if a different department doing the same set of activities. So a question may come to our mind that what is the use of this quality review when we already have a peer review board in place, when we already have a peer review process in place. So let's understand how and in what as this quality review is different from the requirements of the peer review. A quality review is supposed to act as a deterrent. For this quality review, we again have a separate board, which is called as Quality Review Board, QRB, which is constituted by the central government. This is not constituted by the ICAI. Peer Review Board is constituted by the ICAI, but Quality Review Board is constituted by the central government. And this is therefore independent of ICAI. As per the Chartered Accountant Act, central government has the authority to constitute Quality Review Board. Quality Review Board carries out supervisory and disciplinary functions. Now the approach is all different. The approach is not to monitor. Approach is not to aid to improve. Approach is to keep supervising the work of the auditors. So these are the auditors. To keep supervising their work and to look into the disciplinary aspects. A quality review normally pertains to one particular audit conducted by the audit firm. The main objective in case of quality review is to find errors or inadequacies, if any, have been committed by the auditor while conducting the audit. And if there are serious deficiencies, serious errors which the auditors would have committed in the audit of any of their clients, and if those have been detected by the quality reviewer, that may also lead to disciplinary action against the member. So there is a difference in terms of approach. Clear? So quality review will definitely aid for the improvement, but there the perspective is also to keep supervising and to take actions against the known compliances, particularly the known compliances which are serious in nature. Clear? Clear on this aspect? So let's get on to the quality review now. I would like to just a bit of restructure this part. I'm not changing some of these terms. We'll come to it slightly later. But don't get confused with this. Some of these terms which we used in case of peer review, they still remain. So I'm not saying that these terms will also be used for the quality review, but intentionally I have not taken those out. First of all, we'll understand about quality review in general, and then we'll get on to the specifications of the quality review process. All right. So what is this quality review all about? So in terms of the quality review, we can just say that this is another form of getting into a review process as regards the quality of the work which would have been done by the auditor in relation to any of its audit clients. And once again, what we can see over here is the focus is on the audit client. Yeah. So that means once again, when it comes to the quality review, the assurance engagement is something which will form part of this review. If you look at SQC1, SQC1 is what? Auditing standard, which prescribes the quality control standards, the policies and procedures, which are required to be maintained by each and every professional firm. Some of the aspects which are required to be covered over here include the leadership responsibilities within the firm, ethical requirements which are required to be maintained, acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements, human resources, that means the staff, the people management, engagement performance. All of these areas are very, very important to be maintained as per this SQC1. So this was briefly about this SQC1. Now let's get on to the scope of this quality review. So what are the scope or what are the areas which are really required to be focused on in case of a quality review? First, examining whether the engagement partner has ensured with the compliance of applicable technical standards in India and other professional and ethical standards and other relevant guidance. Examine whether the statutory auditor has ensured compliance with relevant laws and regulations as required under applicable auditing standard. Examining whether the audit firm under review has implemented a system of quality control with reference to applicable quality control standards. Examining whether there is no material misstatement of assets and liabilities as at the reporting date in respect of the selected entity. So that's why, what do you see? That's why in this case, what do you see? The focus in this case is, of course, is on the standards similar to what we saw in case of peer review, but the perspective is all different. Perspective is get on to the deficiencies. Perspective is to get on to the lack of compliances which might have taken place during the course of this audit. Okay. So let's understand how this process would really work. Now, we'll have to just keep replacing some of the terms. Now, this board, which was peer review board in case of peer review, will now become QRB or quality review board. So we can just say this as QRB or the board. The term now stands for QRB. So similar to peer review board, we have now quality review board. And let's see how this quality review board will come into existence. So what's the setup requirement for this? Quality review board has been set up by central government, as we have discussed. The first quality review board was constituted by the central government wide notification dated 28th June 2007. And as per the Chartered Accountants Act, the board comprises of a chairman and 10 other members. So there will be one chairman and 10 other members. So all in all, 11 members. Central government nominates the chairperson and 5 other members. So out of which chairperson and members are nominated by central government. The remaining 5, so out of 11, 6 are from the central government nomination. Remaining 5 are nominated by the council of the ICAI. 6 out of the 11 members of the board, including chairperson, are therefore nominated by the central government. Members are nominated from amongst the persons of eminence, having experience in the field of law, economics, business, finance, or accountancy. Clear? Now let's move on to the functions of the quality review board quickly. So what are their functions? Functions of the quality review board. A quality review which is carried out by QRB is directed towards inspection, evaluation of audit quality and adherence to various regulatory requirements. It involves inspection and assessment of the work of practitioner. Who is the practitioner? This is the practitioner. So that means we can now change this term of practice unit to practitioner. So I'm just changing the terms. So this is practitioner. Over here, it's been called as practitioner rather than practice unit. And what's the objective? They would like to assess quality of compliance with accounting standards, disclosure requirements followed by the entity on which audit report is issued, quality of audit and reporting by the practitioner, and the quality control framework adopted by the practitioner or the audit firm in conducting the audit. Okay. Now, as regards this, some of the things that they would like to do will be to make recommendations to the council with regard to quality of services provided by the members of the institute, to review the quality of services provided by the members of the institute, including the audit services, to guide the members of the institute to improve the quality of services and adherence to various statutory and other regulatory requirements. So this is again going to be one of their focus areas. Now, there's also another important aspect which one needs to look into. Let's understand that quickly and then we'll get into the more details of this quality review. MCA has clarified to the QRB that as per the new NAFRA rules, the issue of QRB reviewing audits of the companies or the body corporate specified under NAFRA rules will only arise in case a reference is so made to the QRB by the NAFRA and not otherwise. Now we all understand that NAFRA is in place. NAFRA, you can say once again, is an authority, and this authority is once again to monitor, supervise the entire audit process. And this is also an independent body which is constituted by the central government, which picks up the audit engagements, and the same sort of process is followed over there. So that's why it's been clarified that if there is any engagement which has been picked up by the NAFRA, so if that is to be referred to the QRB, that is something which will flow from the NAFRA to the QRB. Yeah, so that there is no duplication arising over there. Okay, and then I'm not getting into too much details around those requirements related to NAFRA rules, because all of those anyways we are going to cover separately later on. Now, considering the requirements related to the NAFRA which have got attached now, QRB would now be able to initiate reviews of quality of audit services provided by the members of institute only in respect of entities other than specified under NAFRA rules, namely private limited companies, unlisted public companies below the threshold specified under NAFRA rules, and other entities which are not specified under NAFRA rules, and those referred to QRB by NAFRA under the NAFRA rules. However, in the meanwhile, QRB has also been completing its ongoing reviews of top listed and other public interest entities which will process. So we can just very simply say that there should not be a duplication. So any engagement which doesn't fall under NAFRA rules, other than those falling under NAFRA rules, will get captured over here. Or if there is anything which is falling under NAFRA rules, but which NAFRA has assigned to QRB, plus assigned by NAFRA to QRB. Assigned means referred to. So this will also come. So this specifies the engagements which will now be picked up by QRB. Yes, there is a restriction on this. Clear? Because for the larger engagements, for example, if we talk about listed companies, if we talk about large unlisted public companies, those are all getting covered under the NAFRA rules, over which NAFRA will be doing the reviews, and it will not be the quality review board which will be doing those sort of reviews. Clear? Clear on this part? Now, moving on to the powers of the quality review board. So now we have understood as to what all will fall in line in terms of this QRB. So let's understand the powers of the QRB. First, to facilitate the discharge of its functions, the rules in relation to this procedural aspect related to the QRB review provides on its own or through any specialized arrangement set up under the institute, so the QRB can evaluate and review the quality of work and services provided by the member of the institute in such a manner as it may decide. Lay down the procedure of evaluation criteria to evaluate such services being provided by the members of the institute, and to select in such manner and form as it may decide the individual and firms rendering such services for review. Call for information from the institute council or its committees, members, clients. Yeah, as regards all of this information, provided that where the board does not receive the information, where the board does not receive such information. Sorry, I didn't change the slide. Where the board does not receive the information called for it from the members of the institute, the board may request the institute to obtain the information from the member and furnish the same to the board. Provided further that where the board does not receive the information called for from any company registered under the Companies Act, the board may request the central government in the MCA for assistance in obtaining the information. The board may also invite experts to provide expert or technical advice or opinion or analysis on any other matter which may be of relevance to them, make recommendations to the council to guide the members of the institute to improve their professional competence and qualifications, quality of work and services offered, and adherence to various statutory and other regulatory requirements and other matters related thereto. Yeah, so these are some of the parts which we can say exist in relation to the quality review board. Yeah, okay. Now, as regards the coverage of services, let's understand about this quality review board. So we have understood as to which all engagements will come over here, means the companies, what are their powers, how they can ask upon any information from the members of the institute or from the ICAI or from the MCA, whatever is of their relevance in terms of their process which is required to be followed. Now let's move on to the services which are required to be captured by them. Quality review board would require or would involve assessment of work of statutory auditors. So this is focused on the statutory auditors while carrying out statutory audit so that the board is able to assess. So in this case, what I will do is I will add stat auditor. So we can say it's all limited to statutory auditors. That means tax auditor is not covered over here. Yeah, something which we saw in case of peer review, multiple types of assurance services were covered. But in case of quality review, only the stat audit is covered. And what's the focus? Quality of statutory audit and reporting by the statutory auditors and quality control framework adopted by the AFUR in conducting the statutory audit. This procedure would not extend to review of internal audit, that is excluded, tax audit, GST audit, and other special purpose audits conducted by the members of the institute, which may be covered by the board at a later stage or unless otherwise specified, and review of services provided by the members of the institute in employment. So that is also not covered over here. Clear? Yeah. So this is focused only on the statutory audit and nothing except than statutory audit. Clear? Okay. Now, so far we have had discussions about the quality review board, about what all will get covered within their powers, what all services they would like to capture in terms of their review, what all clients will be covered under their purview. Now we will move on to the selection criteria of the audit firms. So how will this selection happen for the audit firms? The quality review has been introduced in stages, with the firms from different classes or types of audit firms being subjected to review at each stage. The board may decide the audit firm to be included in the selection during each stage, Such selection of audit firms for review may be made on the basis of one or more of the following criteria. Criteria based on entities audited. So let's understand that, and I would suggest if you can just follow page number 17.30 of the study material. Criteria which is based on entities audited. Entities other than those specified under NAFTA rules. Now, this is something which we have already written, but still you should remember. First selection criteria will be risk-based selection, including regulatory concerns pointing towards shareholders' risks. Okay, so if there is any concern which has arisen due to any of the regulatory requirements or from any of the regulatory authorities which are pointing towards the risks of the stakeholders in respect of any of the company, on account of being part of sector otherwise identified as being susceptible to risk on the basis of market intelligence reports. Let's suppose within a sector, a lot of risks have been identified and the market intelligence report suggests that there could be significant risks involved in relation to that particular client. Then that can also become the basis. So basically you can say the basis which they have been following is all focused towards this client. So they are picking up the clients from the market domain or from the sources which will impact the clients, and whoever will be auditing this client will become the subject matter of audit. If there has been any reported fraud or likelihood of fraud in relation to any of the clients, serious accounting irregularities in the financial statements highlighted by the media and other reports, again, what's the way to reach out to this practitioner? This client only. Major non-compliances under relevant statutes highlighted in the past reviews. In case of joint audits, if required, all the joint auditors may be reviewed as may be decided by the board on case-to-case basis. So now, for this client, let's suppose if the joint audit is required to be done, then the joint auditors will be required to get involved in this quality review process. The board may also review quality of statutory audit services of AFUR with a view to assessing the quality of statutory audit and its reporting by the statutory auditors and the quality control framework in that respect. Okay, so this is something which the board may want to do. Just give me 1 minute. Next, the board shall not consider cases of complaints received from individuals, firms, companies, other entities, their partners, directors, officers, which shall be continued to be dealt with in accordance with the mechanism available under Chartered Accountants Act. Cases of complaints from only regulatory bodies and other media reports involving serious accounting irregularities shall be considered by the board for the purposes of initiating the review. The selection for suo motu quality reviews may, however, be done using methods such as random sampling, selection of particular classes of entities, audit firms in the manner as specified at 1 above. The Quality Review Board Secretariat shall place the details of the entities and the audit firms which may be selected for the quality review before the board for its consideration. The board at this stage may consider whether the case warrants a quality review by a technical reviewer and may refer the cases selected for quality review to the relevant technical reviewer. The board will obtain the annual report of the entity concerned in terms of the chartered accountant procedures and all of these rules in accordance with the requirements of those rules. Now there's a first criteria which we have just discussed, and if we just get into the perspective of the selection of the criteria, it's all based on the entities. It's all based on the entities. Means if there is any risk involved in that entity, if there is risk involved within the sector in which the entity is operating, if there is any media report which is highlighting some serious irregularities, if there are any frauds or detected frauds or reported frauds in relation to this entity, then this entity will be picked up for review, and therefore the auditor who would have audited this entity will also be picked up in terms of its review process. Next will be the criteria based on audit firms. Selection of audit firms should also be made for quality review of their statutory audit work on random basis. The volume of the work which is handled by them represented by the number and nature of clients, sectors that may be identified as facing high risk or on account of fraud or likelihood of fraud. Okay, now the second criteria will be on the basis of the practitioners, or you can say the practicing units, or you can say the professional firms, in terms of the number of audits they may be handling, in terms of the size of the clients they may be handling, in terms of the risks to which they may be attached to. Because let's suppose if there is any audit firm which has been auditing a large number of clients within a particular sector, so their risk in relation to that particular sector increases significantly. So that can also become one of the basis for selection of the entity or the selection of the engagement, or you can say selection of the audit firm for the purposes of this quality review. Quality review cycle. Now, this quality review cycle is also specified. So let's understand what is this quality review cycle. The following review cycle of audit firms may be followed generally or as may be decided by the board. Once in 3 years for audit firms having 20 or more partners. Once in 3 years for audit firms having 20 or more partners. Once in 4 years for audit firms having 10 or more but less than 20 partners. So this is dependent on the number of partners. So if this is 20 or more, then once every 5 years. If this is less than 20 but 10 or more, so this is 10 or more, less than 20, once every 4 years. Next will be, it's for those having less than 10 partners, once every, this was 3, this was 4, and this was 5. And if you want to relate this to the peer review process, so in case of peer review process, this was dependent on the level of the firm, level of the practicing unit, level 1, level 2, and then there was also one sort of specialized situation. There was also one sort of situation wherein it can be done suo motu. Correct? Yeah. So this is the periodicity which we see in case of quality review requirement. So this is the periodicity. Up to 3 audit engagements of an AFUR may be selected by the board as may be considered appropriate during a particular quality review cycle covering entities of varied industries, size, geographical spread, and regulatory concerns. However, in the absence of any adverse finding in a past review, not more than one audit engagement of the same engagement partner or proprietor of an AFUR may be selected for quality review by the board during a particular quality review cycle. Okay, for a particular engagement partner or for a proprietor, it should be limited to one audit file, even if he has been auditing more than one. However, in case of any adverse findings in the past reviews or in any other situation, QRB may conduct quality review of any particular audit firm or of any particular engagement partner at more frequent interval and or select more than 3 audit engagements also. Yeah, but that is something which is exceptional in nature, which you generally don't get to see. Okay. Now, moving on to the next aspect, and now we will move on to the quality review process. So now, similar to what we saw in case of peer review, we will now get into this quality review process. Though we have understood a lot of things around this quality review process, still we will now get into various aspects of this quality review process, as around the requirements of the reviewer, as around the requirements of the statutory auditor, and what are the various steps which are required to be followed over here also. Now we understand a quality review is an engagement that needs to be carried out by a person who meets the professional standards established by the ICAI. With a view to carrying out the review of quality of audit services, Quality Review Board has decided to seek the services of members of the institute to function as technical reviewers for the board. So now I'm changing this term to TR, technical reviewer. And who is this reviewer? He is again the same reviewer who will be reviewing the work of the practitioner. Now, instead of practicing unit, we are using the term practitioner. Instead of reviewer, we are using the term TR, or you can say technical reviewer. Clear on this? Yeah. Any shortcomings in the quality of quality review would defeat the very purpose of this entire review. It is therefore of utmost importance that insurance quality in this review is done. The board may constitute one or more quality review groups, which is now termed as QRG. So this board will establish quality review group. So another, you can say, sort of party to this process has come in. This is called as QRG. Yeah, and let's understand what is it that they will do. Now the work of this QRG will be to examine the final reports of technical reviewers with a view to assessing the quality of audit and reporting by the AFUR in consultation with the board. There could be two main categories of QRG. There could be two main categories. One, this QRG could be established on the basis of industry, maybe specific to media industry, this has been established, specific to real estate industry, this has been established, or this could be generic also. Yeah. Each of the QRG would be assisted by TR. Of course, this QRG is what? It's a body which has been established for QRB for reviewing the work of technical reviewer. who will be reviewing the work of this. Yes, that's why they need assistance of technical reviewer. The job of technical reviewer would be to prepare a report on the review of statutory audit with a view to assessing their quality of audit and reporting and the review of quality control framework adopted by them in conducting the audit. Yeah, clear on this? Now, moving further is the requirement related to empanelment of technical reviewers. Now, we have understood how this will come into place. Now we need to get into the details of technical review, because next stage will be to assess, to check who will become the technical reviewer. Okay, so if you can just move on to page number 17.32 now. The board has specified following basic minimum criteria for empanelment of technical reviewers with the board. Applications in respect whereof are invited through an online empanelment process on the website of QRB. So these technical reviewers are also required to be empaneled with QRB, similar to what the reviewers of peer review, or you can say peer reviewers, were required to be empaneled with peer review board. So they need to be empaneled with this. Only the empaneled technical reviewers can carry out this review. Okay. Only those can carry out this review. Reviewers should have minimum 15 years of post-qualification experience as a chartered accountant and be currently active in practice of auditing and accounting. So that's why, once again, what do we say? That this reviewer has to be a chartered accountant. Significantly experienced means more than 15 years and should be in practice of audit and accounting, because that's the area which is required to review. He should have handled as a signing partner proprietor at least 3 statutory audit engagements. As a central statutory auditor of banks or public limited companies, government companies, private limited companies having annual turnover of rupees 250 crore and above during the last 10 financial years, provided that out of the aforesaid 3 stat audit engagements, at least 1 must be in respect of other than private limited companies. Okay, so you should not be only limited to the private limited companies, you should also be attached to, say, unlisted public companies or the banks or the government companies in the past. Reviewer should not have any disciplinary proceeding under the Chartered Accountant Act or any other court of law. Reviewer should not currently be a member of the QRB or ICAI Central Council or Regional Council or branch level management committee. So he is a technical reviewer with QRB. He should not be a member of QRB. So that means the member of QRB cannot become a technical reviewer. Clear? Yeah. You remember the members of the QRB? 11 were allowed in total. They cannot become the technical reviewers. Yeah. And the board. What is the board now? QRB may specify any other criteria from time to time apart from the aforesaid basic minimum criteria for empanelment of technical reviewers with the board. Clear? They will also be required to go through a set of procedures, training criteria. These things are very, very important these days. Okay. Now we'll get into the various stages which are involved in conduct of quality review engagements. So let's get on to those stages now. So now we are getting into the process of this quality review. And most of the procedures, most of the requirements related to this type of process will also be similar, with, of course, the change in the approach. So let's understand what are those stages which will now come. So we have understood various requirements in relation to setting up different teams. First, QRB would select the audit firm. Now this is required to be selected. And the audit file for review and identifies TR to conduct the quality review. So the practitioner would be selected, and for this practitioner, which audit client is required to pick up, that will also be selected by QRB. And then the next step will be to identify technical reviewer, because he is the one who is going to do the main job. QRB sends offer letter of engagement to technical reviewer. So once the technical reviewer is selected, an engagement letter will go up to him. But the engagement letter is appointment letter. Means he needs to carry out this task, over which technical reviewer will have to convey his acceptance, provided he is eligible. He is meeting the eligibility conditions. He is also independent. Once again, please remember, he needs to maintain the same confidentiality standards. He needs to maintain the same independence standards. Then the QRB intimates AFUR about the proposed quality review. QRB also sends a copy of this intimation letter to the technical reviewer and provides them contact details of each other for further communication. Yeah, AFUR is audit firm which is under review. Okay. TR sends the specified quality review questionnaire to the AFUR. What is this AFUR? This one. So now questionnaire will go out. Earlier the questionnaires were sent by the peer review board, and which were required to be filled by practicing unit to the peer reviewer. Now the questionnaires are being sent by technical reviewer to the AFUR for filling up. He also calls for additional information from the AFUR if required. So all of those set of activities have started now. TR and his team. So it appears that TR will also get a team. Yeah. TR and his team carry out the quality review by starting their off-site reviews by making proper planning, and then of course they will go to the on-site. It's similar what we saw in case of peer review. On completion of on-site review, TR will send the preliminary report to AFUR. So I'll also introduce a term AFUR, which I've been using quite often. AFUR is audit firm under review. On completion, AFUR to submit representation on preliminary report to the TR, and TR to immediately send the reply of the AFUR to the QRB. TR will submit the final report along with copy of annual report of the entity for the year under review to the QRB in a specified format on his individual letterhead, duly signed and dated within the specified time frame or as extended by the QRB. In addition, he shall also send a copy of the final report to the AFUR, requesting them to send their final reply thereon to the QRB within 7 days of receipt of the final report. AFUR shall also send a copy of their final reply to technical reviewer. So I'll come on to all of these steps one by one. First of all, I'm just quickly giving you a perspective that largely if you'll see all of those steps are same. Yeah. AFUR to submit to QRB their final reply on the final report and feedback in the prescribed format regarding their experience of quality review. Upon receipt of final reply from the AFUR, TR shall submit to QRB within next 7 days a summary of his findings in the specified format containing his findings, technical requirements, final reply of the AFUR, and his final comments thereon. First of all, a preliminary report goes from this to this, responses go over there, then this report will go up to him. Practitioner will also submit a document as regards this entire process of review, and after which technical reviewer will submit the final report to the QRB. QRG after this will consider the report of the TR. Yeah. So now for supporting this entire piece, QRG is available to QRB. So now QRG will examine all of these things. QRG to consider the report of the TR and the responses of the AFUR and make recommendations to QRB. QRG may call for additional details, informations, explanations if required from the technical reviewer or this audit firm as it may deem appropriate, enabling it to assess the quality of audit and reporting by the AFUR. Then the final version will go to the QRB, which the QRB will consider and will also consider the recommendations of the QRG, basis which QRB will then finalize and decide the next course of action. Okay. Composition of the review team. So let's understand the composition of the review team as to how this review team will be composed of. So we have broadly looked into the requirements of all of these processes as to how this entire process will run, all of these activities which will get involved therein. Let's understand all of these points one by one in more detail. Composition of the review team would depend on the size of the AFUR or the size of the entity which is under review. Of course, because if this practicing firm is too large, if this client is too big, then the work involved will be significant, and that's why technical reviewer will need persons to support him. The composition of the team mandatorily headed by a technical reviewer may also include up to 5 assistants engaged by the technical reviewer as may be fixed by the board in each case on need basis. Okay, so he can be supported by 5 assistants on need basis. However, no firm of chartered accountants may be included as member of review team. So when we talk about assistants, these are individual assistants. There's no firm which is getting involved as reviewer or the member. Independence and qualifications of the technical reviewers. So let's understand what's the independence criteria. We all understand that independence is extremely important on the part of the technical reviewers. So qualification, let's understand that. He should not have any disciplinary proceeding, of course, very, very important. He or his firm or any of the network firms or the partners should not have been the statutory auditor of the company. So that means this conflict of interest should not be there. He or his firm or any of his network firm or any of his partners should not have had any association with this practicing firm. Same criteria. Yeah. There should not be any conflict of interest. He should comply with eligibility conditions laid down under the Companies Act as regards the appointment of an auditor under section 141 subsection 3. So this is another qualification criteria which he needs to fulfill. He does not belong to the city or region of the head office of the AFUR. So that means he has to be from the city or the region which is other than the head office of this practice unit. Clear? Yeah. Independence of these assistants. Now we have talked about the independence and qualification of reviewers. Now these assistants will also be required to maintain the confidentiality standards. They would also be required to be independent. Yeah, very, very important on their part. So let's understand what are the requirements on their part. He shall also be a chartered accountant. This assistant should also be a chartered accountant. He does not attract any of the disqualifications. He shall have to sign statement of confidentiality. He shall have no direct interface with either the audit firm under review or the board. Yeah. So the same thing should not arise in his case also. Clear? He should also be free from all of these things. Just 1 minute. Next, he should have been working with this firm or with this technical reviewer for at least 1 year as a member or as a partner in the CA firm. Otherwise, he is not eligible to become his assistant. He should not have been associated with this firm or this entity whose audit is being reviewed during the last 3 financial years and or thereafter. So that is again to avoid the conflict of interest. He should not have any disciplinary proceeding against him. He should not be a member of current QRB or ICAI Central Council or Regional Council. He should not himself be empaneled as technical reviewer. So that means 2 technical reviewers cannot become assistant. So one technical reviewer cannot become assistant to another technical reviewer. Okay, and the board again will consider various factors over here. Means the industry knowledge, the industry expertise as regards the assistants also, because assistants are also going to play a very, very important role over here. Correct? Confidentiality is of utmost importance, considering the fact that it's not only the information of this firm, but also the information of the client, which will be shared with both of these parties. Correct? So there are certain guidelines which are relevant for the technical reviewers. Let's understand about those guidelines, and then we'll get on to the detailed stepwise approach in relation to this quality review process. TR shall himself make on-site visit along with his assistants for conducting the review of audit working papers. So it's not that he will just send the assistants to the office of the practice unit. No. He will go himself along with the assistants. So he has to lead. TR shall follow technical guide on conducting quality review as brought out by the quality review board, if there is any. TR, including his assistants, will have access to or take abstracts of the records and documents maintained by the AFUR in relation to the review. However, in order to maintain confidentiality, TR, including his assistants, shall not make any copies, extracts to of the AFUR's clients' files or records examined by them while conducting review as part of their working papers. TR shall provide detailed comments giving proper justification and explanation in respect of various matters required to be commented upon by TRs in the final report, including its appendices. TR shall also refer other guidance which is provided by QRB from time to time. TR shall be required to segregate his observations into those material and immaterial. Means when they will be submitting their report, it should be focused on the key observations and non-material. So same what we see in case of audit report also. TR should build in a review process to be able to review audit documentation. Now this is again very, very important, the audit documentation, because that will become the very basis of this entire review. TR shall suitably include a suitable paragraph in the review report on the adequacy of fraud reporting by the statutory auditors. Yeah, so this is one area which is required to be specifically commented upon by the TR. So now we will move on to this entire approach, stage by stage, as to how this entire approach will be carried out. Most of the steps that we have discussed are going to remain same, so those are not going to change. So we are just getting into a more detailed discussion around it. Yeah, so let's understand. TR, after completion of his on-site review, is required to submit preliminary report to the AFUR. So first of all, what has he done? He has asked for this information. Information has gone out to him. He has reviewed the work on the basis of the preliminary information. Then he has also visited the site of the practice unit, or you can say the audit firm, along with the assistants, whatever were required and approved by the QRB. Yeah, so let's suppose this entire piece of work is complete. So now what is required to be done? He will submit plenary report to the AFUR on the review of quality of audit, and after obtaining the comments of AFUR on his preliminary report, TR would submit his final report to the board in a specified format, and here again a specified period of time. So this entire process is also having a prefixed time within which this needs to be completed. The board may, however, extend the timeline for submission of final report. The report should be issued on the letterhead of this technical reviewer, and it should be duly signed by the technical reviewer. The report should be addressed to the chairperson of the board and should be dated as of the date of the conclusion of the review. The TR, based upon his satisfaction from the representation by the audit firm, may decide to issue either an interim report or final report to the board. TR shall also forward a copy of final report to the AFUR, requesting them to submit to the board their final comments on the observations made by him in the final report. So first of all, preliminary report goes out over here. And similar, if you remember, which happened in case of peer review, and then the replies will go out. So I'm just removing this part now. So over which replies will go out. Basis this, TR may either consider preliminary report to the board first of all, or may submit the final report. That is on the discretion and the assessment of the TR. The report which is prepared by the TR and the final comments of the AFUR shall be considered by the QRG. So even though you may be thinking that all of this data is going out to the QRB, but please understand that these two are same bodies. So everything which is going out to QRB is also going out to QRG. So everything at the first place will always be assessed by the QRG, and a final presentation of this will be given to the QRB by the QRG. And QRG will assess all of this work, review all of these matters. They will accordingly provide their recommendations to the QRB in relation to this entire piece of activity which is conducted by the TR. And QRG, for its clarifications, for its information, may call upon more information from the TR, may call upon more information from this audit firm also. Okay. QRG may also interact with concerned TR if needed and request him to present his final report to the QRG in certain circumstances, including where the interaction with TR is necessarily warranted to seek clarifications. So let's suppose if they need to interact necessarily. So all of this communication is going on in writing, but let's suppose if they need to interact so that more clarity can be obtained as their observation, the approach, the perspective with which he has been giving his approach, then they may want to have an interaction also, which will be mandatory on their part, TR and the QRG. Where there are complete differences between the observations of the TR and the views of the audit firm, to the extent that an interaction with the TR and audit firm is considered necessary. So that is again something which QRG will decide. Let's suppose they are giving some comments which are completely in contradiction with what TR is giving. So that's why there could be a need, there could be a need for meeting with these two parties. Yeah, and this is something which will be assessed by the QRG. Where the QRG is dissatisfied with the quality of review report of TR, enabling the TR to have better understanding of the expectations. Okay. Generally, the review reports in respect of all the joint auditors of an entity should be considered together with the QRG. Let's suppose if the joint auditors are involved, then the review reports of all the joint auditors will be together read and understood, and only then they will get the clear picture, clear perspective. Correct? QRG shall consider the report of TR in respect of quality reviews refer to it and submit its recommendations of the same to the board within a reasonable period. Okay. QRG may consider the following broad parameters for determining the action to be recommended to the board upon consideration of the observations of the TR. Let's understand what are those factors which the QRG will consider. First, in situations where the financial statements are not materially prepared in accordance with requirements of applicable financial reporting framework, auditor has not obtained, please understand, not obtained reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements are free from material misstatements. Okay, yeah. So all of these situations will be first. In other cases of non-compliances to various requirements of technical standards. So one is wherein the financial statements were materially misstated, but those were not properly handled by the audit firm. And the other one could be the one wherein the financial statements are good, but certain compliances have not been taken care of. In respect of other observations, and there could also be some more observations of trivial nature, and where the audit firm has also agreed to take effective corrective step in future and has already taken the corrective step. Yes, these can become the basis of the QRG making a recommendation to the QRB. All right. Moving on to next, that is about reporting and other procedures. The reviewer, based on the conclusions drawn from the review, shall issue a preliminary and subsequently the final report. This is something we have covered, and this has to be in the format which is prescribed by the board. Let's understand how this reviewer may qualify the report. What will become the basis of qualifying the report of the reviewer? And this qualification is similar to what we see in case of audit report. That means there are some discrepancies which he wants to bring out in his final report. So let's see what could be the reasons of this reviewer bringing out discrepancies in the report as regards the review of the work of this audit firm. First, non-compliance with technical standards. It could be non-compliance with technical standards and other relevant guidance. Non-compliance with relevant laws and regulations as required under applicable auditing standard. Quality control system design deficiency or non-compliance with quality control policies and procedures. Okay, so you can just say in very, very simple terms that it's all about non-compliance of the applicable reporting framework. If there is anything which is in relation to the application reporting framework, which has not been complied by the technical reviewer, which has not been complied by the audit firm, then that can become the basis for the technical reviewer to report in his report to the QRB. Okay. We can also look at some basic elements of the report of the reviewer. So if you can all move on to page number 17.40. There are some basic elements you may consider over there. Elements related to audit quality of companies. First, a reference to the description of scope of review. Of course, the scope is very important. Statement indicating instances of lack of compliance with technical standards and professional ethical standards. Statement indicating instances of lack of compliance with laws and regulations. So first of all, scope and then the non-compliances. Elements then which are related to quality control. First is related to audit quality of companies. Second is related to the quality control framework. An indication of whether audit firm has implemented a system of quality control with reference to quality control standards or not. So this is very much in line with SQC1. Yeah, and this is very, very important area in relation to the reviews of the work of any of the audit firms, because this will give an insight about the entire approach, about the overall perspective which this firm would have been following in relation to various engagements. Statement indicating system of quality control is the responsibility of AFUR. An opinion whether audit firm's system of quality control has been designed to meet the requirements of quality control standards for attestation services or not, whether reviewer concludes that a modification in the report is necessary, a description of reasons for the modification, a reference to the preliminary report, of course that is very, very important, an attachment which describes the quality review conducted, including an overview and information on planning and performing the review. Okay. Now the types of the review reports, as we have discussed, are all done. Then we have some illustrative qualifications. So all of you can move on to page number 17.42, please. On page number 17.42, if you'll see, there are illustrative qualifications which are given in respect to some of the non-compliances which would have been reported. So let's quickly go through some of the non-compliances. No process of maintaining standard checklists, manuals, working papers to ensure consistency in the quality of each engagement. So this is one of the non-compliance which has been observed. Next, there was no documentation to substantiate communication by the auditor with the management in writing about significant deficiencies in internal control that the auditor has communicated or intends to communicate to those charged with governance, unless it would be inappropriate to communicate directly to the management in circumstances. Another qualification, let's see. Management representation letter had been obtained for the general points only, covering the financial statements, not on other specific items of the financial statements. Though its perspective is huge, its coverage should be big enough. Another one, disclosures related to the previous year's figures in regard to the related parties were not given. So can you see, it can be as specific to a particular area, or it could be very, very generic related to the audit of the financial statements, or it could be very, very specific in relation to the control mechanism of the audit firm. Yeah. So the perspective is very clear that this entire audit process, whether that has been completed in line with the requirements of applicable reporting framework or not, which comprises of everything, which comprises of ethical standards, whether it is about professional ethics or any of the quality procedures, etc., to be adopted, arising out of any statute, whether it is about compliance of the accounting standards, whether it is about compliance of the auditing standards, okay, whether it is about compliance of any of the guidance notes or any of the guidances or advisories which are issued and which are mandatory, and whether it is about compliance of any of the legal or regulatory requirements. Yeah. So all of these aspects, which are the duties of the statutory auditor, whether those have been complied with or not. Now moving on to the next part, quickly onto this. Consideration of the report of QRG. QRG's report will then be considered by the QRB. Yeah. And this QRG's report on the quality of audit by the auditor of PSU shall be furnished to the CAG on a case-to-case basis, and the CAG's view, Comptroller and Auditor General of India, if any, shall be put up before the QRB if the public sector company is involved with the recommendations of the QRG. In all other cases, QRG's recommendation along with the decision of the board on the quality of audit by the auditor of PSU shall be furnished to the office of CAG for information. And let's understand now the actions that may be recommended by the quality review board in relation to this entire process which will get completed. Make recommendations to the Council of ICAI for referring the case for any disciplinary action to be taken. Issue advisory and guidance to AFUR for improvement in the quality of services and adherence to various statutory and regulatory requirements. And this may also be sent to the ICAI for their reference. Inform the details of non-compliance to regulatory bodies wherever these are thought to be appropriate. Intimate the audit firm as to the findings of the report as well as the action initiative as above. In case of review arising out of reference received from a regulatory body, inform the results of review and the details of action taken to the concerned regulatory body. Consider the matter complete and the audit firm accordingly. So all of these actions are the one which will be decided by the board, and one should really consider that the action are all directed or decided on the basis of their relevance. Okay, let's suppose if any serious matter is concerned wherein the board may think it appropriate to consider the relevant authority, so that they may take the action against the audit firm or against the client, or some action needs to be taken to protect, to safeguard the interest of the public in that context. So they will take the action accordingly. So if they believe that the quality of this firm should be improved upon, so communication will definitely be made to the ICAI in times. The offense could be very serious, the non-compliance could be very serious, wherein an action may also be required to be taken against the audit firm, which will again be referred to the ICAI. Then there is also a mechanism for follow-up of review findings. Let's understand that. QRB shall require audit firm to submit a compliance report to the board within specified period for adopting necessary measures to avoid recurrence or corrective steps in respect of advisories or the guidances issued to audit firm by the QRB. QRB may follow up and review effectiveness of corrective actions taken by the audit firms. And the results of reviews shall be used for off-site monitoring as well as next on-site review. So this may also be planned. In case of lack of effective corrective action, next on-site review may be organized earlier. So again, there's a periodicity over here, but a follow-up is again existing in this process, so that it's not only the disciplinary action, it's not only the action which is taken, but the correction is also happening in relation to that audit firm. This can only be ensured through that follow-up mechanism. So that is also established, and through which, even though an action may be taken against this firm, but definitely they will also be moving in towards improving the quality of their audit services. Okay, clear on this? Yeah. So this was all about quality review, and as we would have understood, though the approach, though the parties happen to be different over here, yeah, or we can say the teams happen to be different over here in terms of the quality review, but largely both the processes are very much in line in terms of how they are approached. Yeah, though the nitty-gritty into which they will go, the way they are approached are going to be different, but still on a larger basis there are a lot of similarities which you can see in this entire process. And needless to say, all of these things have been established for only one thing: to ensure that the quality of audit is of utmost standards. Yeah, and with this we come to an end to our discussion on this peer review as well as quality control, and we are also towards the end of our session today. So with this, if you have any questions, any doubts, you can just send across your queries and we can have a discussion on that in the next session. And as of today, we'll just end our session now, and in the next session we'll also be starting with a new topic. So thanks to all of you for your time and for your wonderful participation once again. Thanks so much.